Well, it's not working in prod. Indeed, it's not working in prod. Well, it's not my problem. It works just fine on my machine and on the dev server. Well, I told you all systems are ISOs. And if it's working in dev, it's working in prod.
It's ISO?
Oh, yeah. Essentially, I mean, pretty much almost. Almost? What do you mean, almost? You know, there's maybe a very small gap in minor versions, and for some plugins. Nothing particularly important.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Doc Talks today. We've got a very special guest on today. Donnie from Docker is the VP of Products. Pardon me. Donnie leads the direction and vision of Docker platform. His extensive experience in these areas include leading the DevOps transformation at Global Enterprise CWT, as well as leading the global team at 451 Research. Prior roles include advising startups and Global 2000 enterprises at RedMonk, and leading more than 250 open source contributors at Gentoo Linux. Donnie holds a PhD in biochemistry and biophysics from Oregon State University, where he specialized in computational structural biology. Has a dual BS and BA degrees in biochemistry and chemistry from the University of Richmond. Wow. Welcome, Donnie. Thanks for joining us. I appreciate it.
Thanks. I'm excited to be here today.
Awesome. All right, let's jump into it because I have, So a PhD in biochemistry and biophysics. How did that come about? What's your interest there?
Yeah, it's a long story. You know, I think everybody has that career path that they wanted to be when they were a kid. And for me, it was a doctor. And so, you know, I started getting into the life sciences thinking, man, I've got to do this research thing. I guess I'll just have to kind of push through it so that I can be a doctor. Along the road, I discovered that I don't like blood at all. So, you know, the idea of dealing with that all day kind of was not going to pan out. But at the same time, I found that I really liked research, really liked pushing the boundaries, what was possible, liked the idea of being able to make an impact on the world. And so I got into that. And along the way, to do science, I had to learn how to use Linux because we were doing all these computer simulations of how do molecules change at different temperatures in your body, and how do proteins work as they're trying to do the jobs inside all of your cells and everything. So I had to get into the computer thing pretty deeply. Turned out that was what I ended up being passionate about. And so my whole career was kind of a series of discoveries over the journey of all the different things I've done.
Yeah, interesting. Oh, that's cool. That's cool. So you wanted to be a doctor, right? So you became a doctor, but just not cutting people open, right?
Right. Yeah. Not the kind of doctor I expected. I always have to tell people it's like my most tired joke of all time. Like, yeah, I'm not that kind of doctor.
Well, cool. So that kind of leads into how you got into tech, got into Linux and started, I'm sure it was Mathematica involved, or maybe that's not on the biology side. I got to, I'm pretty ignorant.
It was in there. So yeah, like Mathematica and MATLAB and Octave and all those kinds of simulation things. So I started, before I got into biochemistry really heavily, I actually did quantum chemistry before that. And you've got all kinds of, complicated, linear algebra and working with partial differential equations and all kinds of matrix math. And it's the kind of thing you do it once by hand and then never again. And that's when you go to software.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. I just gave a talk to a bunch of ML folks. Right. And that stuff just blows me away. Luckily, I was just talking about how to put that inside of containers and move it places. But because linear math and matrix, you lose me. I tried to do a graphics programming, but and I stopped. Kind of same thing.
Yeah, same thing. And so it all comes together at some point. So I got into working on Gentoo Linux for a long time as an open source developer and later there. And as part of that, I was packaging up the graphics driver and the graphics server, the X server for Linux. And I was like, man, all this weird, like, why the same math comes from like quantum chemistry and comes back to me when I'm thinking about like 3D rotations and Z axes and everything, maintaining X and working on that. It's been crazy.
Yeah. Cool. Well, let me say hello to a couple of folks that join us all the time. We got Crazy Max out there. How's it going, Crazy Max? Crazy Max developed our GitHub Actions, and he's a captain, Docker captain. Thanks for dropping in. He's always there. George, how's it going, man? Thanks for showing up again. I appreciate you always show up. I really, really appreciate always interact with us. Good to virtually see you, I guess. Crazy Max says he's fine. Awesome. Good deal. Well, let's, okay. So once we start talking, right. So, I'd met you during the workday and when you were introduced and came to the company, but when I started looking at your bio and your background, super interesting, right? You have a great pedigree. So I thought I'd kick things off. Why Docker? What brought you to Docker? What are you excited about?
I spent some time as an industry analyst at firms like Red Monk and 451, studying industry trends around software development, DevOps, kind of what was the bleeding edge, the leading edge, trying to keep track of the latest and greatest for many years. And so, back as early as 2013, I was hearing from, a lot of the people who I trust as part of kind of the early adopter community saying, hey, there's this thing called Docker coming along. Like, it's going to be the coolest thing. You got to keep your eyes out for it. It's going to be amazing. And so even back then, like the day it came out, I started digging into it. And I was thinking, this is going to be big. This is going to be huge. This is going to change the industry. And have been following it ever since. Docker's gone through a lot of different kind of transformations over the course of the past few years. But I've always thought that promise of the developer experience and of changing how people build, share, and run software was amazing. So to me, it was so exciting when Docker went back to its roots, went back to everything that made it amazing in the first place. And when you think about it, all of those problems are still there. The industry has evolved. Things have changed over the past 5-7 years. Things have gotten more complicated in general. And so the problems that Docker solves, like it may be solving them in a little bit different way than it did 5 years ago, 7 years ago. But those problems are still there. And there's still a ton of opportunity to do really cool stuff. So when I came across the opportunity to join Docker, to work with the amazing team at Docker, many of whom I'd had interactions with over the years, a lot of the executive staff is background, not just at Docker, but at companies like Puppet, like Hortonworks, Cloudera, a lot of places that have done, a great open source core of a company and built something that's been very successful around it, give me a lot of confidence that we could do something amazing with Docker too.
Yeah, likewise. Yeah, the leadership was really important to me, right? They have a great vision and good thinkers, right? And a successful track record was very important to me, right? Yeah, I remember talking to SJ, Scott Johnston, and this is before we kind of shifted back, but we had been talking about it internally, and before, hitting on your point of focusing back on developers, and that was really exciting to me to say. And we were talking about, oh man, if you could get code on your machine and easily run it somewhere in the cloud, I mean, that'd be huge for a huge amount of development teams out there. I think, unfortunately, sometimes I make the mistake, and I probably mentioned on here before, right? I think everybody knows Docker, right? Everybody has a DevOps team. Everybody has an ops team. Everybody knows, right? And that's just not the case, right? It's a steep learning curve, some of the clouds for sure. Yeah. Well, cool. So tell me a little bit about, where do you see the platform heading? Where do you see Docker heading? Kind of maybe a little bit of a future vision. You haven't been here very long, so I'm going to give you, but I'm going to, maybe push a little bit. But just talk a little bit maybe about your vision and what you see coming in to the next year.
Sure. Yeah, I think for me, I talked about, I think Docker as an idea and as a problem and as a developer experience is incredible. And so what we need to do is make sure we build on the things that make Docker great, and that we focus on taking all of those to the next level. And so, if you step back, and I went back a few days ago to rewatch some of the early 2013 talks, because I thought, let's go look at the roots of this whole movement and let's see what made it amazing in the first place. And it was, described as the problem of shipping at the time, but shipping in a much broader context than you usually think about it. It was, not just get my code to prod. It was, how do I share my development environment with my colleagues, with open source contributors? How do I deploy from my development box to a staging server? How do I scale from one server to multiple servers? How do I migrate across hosting providers? Public cloud to public cloud, private cloud to public cloud, data center to data center, right? All of those kind of in the context of like, what does it take to really solve that problem? And what does it take to solve that problem? As we fast forward from 2013 into 2020, what's changed? And one of the biggest things that's changed in software development is applications have gotten even more complicated. We've got microservices as a trend now, as an industry norm, almost in many cases, to the point where it's starting to get some pushback and saying, did we pivot? Did we over-rotate too far into that? We've got, the same kinds of things going on with Kubernetes. It was, not even really a whisper back then, not even an idea necessarily. But now it's kind of a dominant approach to how we handle containers at scale. And so applications have gotten more complicated. Fragmentation continues to grow. Everything is in a different language. You've got more and more different services for every part of a logical application. And that to me is a problem that has made it just harder to think about, how do I help other people get the same experience when they're working on that application or running that application that I get. So to me, it's a problem that's gotten harder. It's gotten more valuable. And it's a problem that, I'm very interested in helping Docker solve. So when we think about where do we want to go, it's ideas like, well, we had that problem solved of doing an application within a single container and doing a great job with that. Over more recent years, you look at what we've done with Compose. Open source the spec early 2020. It's dominant in the community. When we talk to developers, when we look at surveys, we see 2/3, 3/4 of everybody using Docker is using Compose. And so that's a great area where we think about, you can use it for a single container to make it easier to run things consistently. You don't have to remember all the flags, all the commands, make it nice and easy, but you can also use that to extend it to multiple containers, extend it to multiple environments, and use that as a core framework to make it really easy to create that description of what your application looks like, and really easy to share it. And so when we think about, it's currently easy to build that out, but as soon as you want to share it, it hasn't gotten easier. It hasn't gotten efficient. It hasn't gotten effective. And so how can we help focus Docker on solving those kinds of developer problems in developers' inner loops, as they're working locally, as well as their outer loops, as they're interfacing, getting their code, getting their application from their box to their staging server, to the cloud, getting it in a way so that their colleagues can review it, so that they can test things out, right? So that somebody in QA can try the same thing that you're working on before it's been published to the world at large. Those are great opportunities for us to help make Docker more effective for people, to help it solve those problems in multiple containers. Another thing that we've seen as we've been recreating this new business model for Docker as a company has been that people love the official images. It's been such a hugely valuable piece of what we've got, and one that we haven't put as much attention into as we could. Right. And so when we think about what we can really make amazing, it's those kinds of building blocks that help developers accelerate how they're building applications, right? Because what you want to do, and this is open source as a whole, like, you want to pick up pieces that are ready to go, integrate them into your application, know that and trust that those pieces are good, they're high quality, they're consistent, they're minimal, they're secure, build on top of that stuff and ship. And so for us, it's how do we make that problem easier, not with the tools around the application. Many other companies are solving those tools around the application, great ecosystems there, but with the components that are part of the application itself, how that is described, how it's built, and how it's delivered.
Yeah, fantastic. Quick note, Crazy Max just put up there, it's going to cut it off. Yeah, the increase, I think this is from the CNCF survey 2020, which I haven't read yet, so I'll have to go dig it up. Yeah, in my role, I have to remember, right? I've been at Docker for almost 4 years. Did a little side trip over to Mirantis for a little bit, but ran back here. But being here at 4 years and of using it for a long time, right? I just assume everybody knows containers and everybody's using them, right? And it's just not the case, right? We have people flocking to containers, new developers, right? And so in the past, right, previous Docker, right, we were focused a little bit more on ops, right, and DevOps. And that's an interesting story. So I'd love to, why developers, right? Why are we focusing back on them? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, great question. And when I think about one of the things that really made Docker compelling to me right now is that I feel like if you look at the container ecosystem, all the companies in there, all what they're doing, almost everybody, the vast majority are focused on solving ops problems because it's easier in many ways. It's still not easy, don't get me wrong. But you can apply that same kind of enterprise sales motion that you've been applying to a lot of other software that these companies already have and say, oh, and now we've got your new platform for running applications. And we'll just kind of like, here's your invoice. You can kind of pay us when you're ready. It's like a classic top-down sales motion, solving ops problems of here's your kind of consistent runtime platform. It scales, it does failover, it does logging, it does monitoring, kind of all of those things.
Right.
And that market has a lot of companies in it. There's a ton of different companies that, initially started with container platforms, moving into container orchestration. Now you've got a ton of different activity going on of, well, if Kubernetes is the dominant approach in production containers right now, what do we build on top of it? And so you've got all these companies doing things in areas like service meshes to help solve some of the problems at the application layer in production, or kind of intermediate in between the platform and the application, perhaps. And so, I think there's a whole lot going on there. I followed kind of early on as the OpenStack community was happening.
Right.
A lot of that evolved into the container community, moving into Kubernetes. It's many of the same companies, same people, even as a matter of fact, moving across this. And it's always been a challenge because there's so many vendors in there that there's not a lot of air. And everybody's kind of hoping like, oh, the customers are going to come eventually. They're going to come eventually. But I saw Docker as taking a really different approach of trying to solve not ops problems or production only problems, but solving problems for developers in a bottom-up approach, which I am a huge fan of. After working, at places like RedMonk, where we've been talking about developers are the new kingmakers for many, many years now. Bottom-up adoption is something, I have a strong belief in. I have a strong belief in looking at what happened over the past couple of decades with technologies like Linux, like MySQL, like the developers led. The developers were the influencers that drove the adoption of that. And so to me, being able to solve problems for developers in a way that is really accessible and friendly to developers, like our pricing model, we totally reworked that in a way so that it was predictable. Like if you're a developer, you buy a seat. And there you go, right? You don't have to be like, oh, let me figure out how many gigabytes of this did I use and how many gigabytes of that, and like how big is this image, and I'm not quite sure. How do we solve those problems for you so you can focus on building your application and not focus on kind of everything around it?
Yeah. I love our new pricing model. I had the same thing before I came to Docker. I was like, well, how many repos do I need? And yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna throw you a curveball here because the guy came up on the question. I get this question all the time. So what's the deal with Swarm then? Obi still has Swarm kit. And I agree. I love Swarm. When I ran the customer success engineering team, we ran everything on Swarm, right? And I was the guy that kept it up and running, and it was up 5 nines. I'm risky to say 5 nines, but definitely 4 nines, right? And I did not touch it. It just ran like a charm. But yeah, so love to hear your thoughts on Swarm, and maybe if you have any direction on where that's going, if at all, or I'll just leave it a little open-ended there. Sorry for maybe pulling you into it.
I think one of these things that I'm trying to do as somebody coming into this company for the first time, I'm just over 30 days in now. I just had my 30-day review last week, and things are going pretty well so far.
Did you pass them? I think
I'm still here, right?
Yeah.
So things might be going pretty well. So when I think about like, what do we do with Swarm? My first inclination on this and on everything that we're doing as we're building out what do our future state roadmaps look like is going back to the people who use our software and making sure that we have a lot of clarity on who are those personas, who are those people who we're solving problems for. Right now, it's the developer, it's the development team. How do we get rock solid understandings of those people? We're doing tons of user research. We're talking to developers on a daily basis about what their problems are, what the bigger picture of their workflow looks like. Because I want to make sure that we're thinking not just about what can we do with Docker, but what problems do developers have? What are the biggest, meatiest problems in their workflows, and going after that? And so we're going to be driving our future product investments based on problems and the value of those problems for developers versus based on, we've got this technology over here and it's cool, but it doesn't have commercial viability. Now, I'm not saying one way or the other right now that SwarmKit is going to go forward or isn't going to go forward. What I'm giving you is a framework for thinking, is this solving a valuable problem for developers? And that is going to define the level of investment that we make in all the different technologies, all the different open source tools that Docker has going forward. And so is SwarmKit the best way for developers to easily run containers locally and easily handle, kind of multi-container environments? And if so, then why would we not keep it? Why would we not invest in it? If we later decide, oh, there's a better way for us to handle those developer environments or areas that developers touch for containers, then we'll continue investing in that better way. I think that's something that I really like about Docker in its current state, is that it is so open to alternatives. It is open to options. When you look at the way that we've been building out different partnerships over the past year, the way that we've been embracing technologies like Kubernetes that previously, we might have kind of pushed away and said, oh, no, we're going like this is all in, it's Docker or nothing. But instead, let's embrace the ecosystem. Let's meet developers where they are, and let's solve problems in the workflows that they have. That's what really gets me excited.
Yeah. I was going to ask about, and this kind of flows into that, our partnerships, right, with AWS and Azure, Microsoft, and Compose. And so can you give us, our listeners, a little idea of your thoughts around where we might build, where we might integrate, what's that kind of thought process around there to help developers really get code to cloud in the best, easiest streamlined flow, right?
Yeah, I think as I alluded to, our idea now is thinking about what is the problem first. Is it a valuable problem, like a problem that customers, developers really get frustrated by? Is it a big pain point, a big annoyance, a big opportunity? And so, I go out there every day. I'm asking developers, what are your top 5 most annoying things that you do every day as part of your work, as you're writing code, as you're testing, as you're debugging? And then we start to work through, how can we think about solving those problems? Is it something where it's a natural extension of the products and the tech stack that we have? Is it something that would be orthogonal to the capabilities that we've got in-house today, orthogonal to the architecture that we have? A big challenge for us to deliver. And so, I think it's a very rational approach for us of, we know our customers have problems. What are the best ways for us to solve them? Is the best way for us to spend 9 months, 12 months, 18 months working on a brand new product? Or is the best way for us, let's go out there and spend 3 months building out a new partnership, integrating that solution into something that is really seamless experience, and moving off of that. And so, when we look at, some of the partnerships we've got, it's really about what are those really great experiences we can create to get you from code to application, knowing that that application is in a state where it's high quality, it's secure, it's minimal, and you can easily get it to wherever you need it to go. And so, if we get more specific about that, we start looking at some of the integrations that we've built out with AWS, with Microsoft, to get you into their container service, with a really clean integration where you basically just bring up your context and there you are, right? And you're pushing directly into a container instance. Or if you look at the integration that we've been building with Snyk, the question is, how can we make security easy for you, right? Yeah. We want it to be easy locally so that you don't, the earlier in your life cycle you're doing stuff, the easier it is, the less expensive and slow it is to solve that problem. So how do we expose the security issues earlier before it gets down to, a lot of people are still working in companies where there's these huge release gates, all right? And you got a big release management team, you got this go, no-go meeting, there's 25 people in there, a big old checklist. You don't want that to be the point at which your security team goes and runs a security scan and says, oh, hold on, we're going to have to delay this release. We're going to have to like go all the way back, waste a bunch of rework, do all kinds of wasted time, and slowing down the value that you're able to deliver to your customers. We want to be able to solve those problems early and in a way that you're confident that you're good to go, and then you can go.
Yeah. And I have a secret belief that those security folks love doing that just right at the last minute. You guys can beat me up on the internet if that's not true, but
No, I'll take you on that one. I'll take you on. Yeah, at
it
CWT,
feels like that. Yeah.
At CWT, I mean, one of the most valuable things that I was able to do as a leader there was build a good partnership with our security team.
Yeah.
Because they, they're under a lot of stress and they're frustrated themselves that they get brought in so late. They get brought in too late to be able to build in security by design. They don't really want to sit there and manually audit everything, but in some cases, in larger companies, they may not have enough of the engineering and automation capabilities in-house to solve those problems. So there's some great opportunities for partnership on that. We were able to make tons of progress in, I think even on the side of kind of app dev groups or DevOps groups, whatever you might be calling them. It's easy to take an initial no from security as a final no, instead of partnering on figuring out like, what are the risks here? What is the value? How do we find a path through this? It's so easy. And this is, I think, one of the reasons why some enterprises move so slowly is that they hear an initial no from any one of like 30 different stakeholders, all of whom can veto a decision, and take that as the final answer instead of the, I don't understand this well enough, or like, let's think through some alternatives, or how could we move the needle forward kind of answer.
Yeah, for sure. And I love that. I love our integration with Snyk. As an engineer, fingers on the keyboard for 25 years, right? It is unfortunately something you don't think about initially, right? But having it right there in Docker, the tools, makes it a lot easier, right? To think about it and then automate it, right? Nicely integrated with the tools you're using now. Yeah, it's one of the best integrations I think we have so far. I love the cloud integrations too. I mean, the folks I'm talking out in the community, right? Just love it, right? And even the ops folks are like, I swear, I think it's like every 2 weeks I grab the latest, right? And there's new features in there, there's new flags, right? It's moving fast, but yeah.
So I think about things like security. What I would love to hear from those of you listening here is, what are those other problems you have that you end up solving super late that are painful and slow and frustrating for everybody, that you just wish you could solve earlier? Like that's the kind of stuff I'd love to bring up. We'll probably get to this later, but I'm going to flag you early, which is we have an open roadmap on GitHub. And if you have ideas like that, go in there, create issues, because that is the start of a lot of what we're doing is listening to our users, listening to our customers, and building things that solve real problems they have. And so what I really need from you for us to be successful in building great things for you is your voice, sharing your problems, your experiences, your opportunities.
Yeah. And Donnie, I have to ask you to back me up here. On the show all the time, we always give out the roadmap. And Donnie does look at that roadmap. His whole team does. Everybody at Docker is watching that.
We just had a review this morning looking at the latest items. And we do that constantly.
Yeah. So please go put some issues in there, read what's in there, uptick everything.
And as a matter of fact, hopefully we'll get a chance to discuss it later, but we just decided to do something big based on the feedback we were getting on our open roadmap.
Let's talk about it now. What I think I might know what it is, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so hopefully some of you have seen that we announced our plans, our work toward doing a Mac desktop for the new Apple Silicon M1 chip. We just put out a blog post a few days ago on that. And one of the biggest drivers for that for us was listening to the demand from our users and from our customers. Like I said, we're basing our decisions on what our customers want, where they're seeing value, where they have problems to solve. And right now, that in a matter of days after the announcement, that bubbled up from kind of hidden in the noise of all the different possible things that we've been looking at to being the #1 most upvoted issue on our entire roadmap. And in fact, not even just the current #1, but the #1 of all time. And that for us was exactly the kind of signal that helps us make decisions and make decisions quickly. about where to make significant product investments.
Yeah. It was cool to see it internally. I'm excited. John, Matt, if my bosses, if you're listening, I'm coming in to ask for an Apple Silicon here very soon. But anyways, but okay, switching. Yeah, I think a lot of the engineers will want them first, right? But switching gears a tiny bit, but jumping back as you were talking about vision and our different products and kind of streamlining our things together and bringing them more cohesively together. Talk a little bit about Hub and where you see Hub. I know a lot of the community, sometimes thinks it's just Hub as just a repo, right? But it's really not. There's a lot more there. And yeah, so I'd love to hear some of the thoughts around Hub.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, one of the big things that we've been working toward over the past year has been, we now have a pricing model that lets you buy a single Docker subscription and you get it all. There is one product, it's Docker. You get your Hub, you get your desktop, you get sneak scanning for security, you get all kinds of other pieces of it. And that's really the direction we continue to push is how do we make this really cohesive so that it is like, if we're helping you get from code to cloud more quickly and more easily, then we have to go from code to cloud too. We have to partner with you alongside of you every step of that journey so that we're able to solve those problems for you. And so that's where the direction we're headed with Hub ties into it. You look at some of the things in there, it is not just a repo, it is not just a registry. That is only the start of it. And, if you think about it that way, I would encourage you, take another look. In fact, I even, as we have this conversation, have our pricing page open, not because I'm trying to sell stuff, but it's a great kind of breakdown of what are all the different things that there are that are interesting. And if you start walking through that, it's not just the basic stuff around a repository and yeah, sure, there's different numbers of collaborators you can add, and there's all kinds of different sizes to teams. But there's also, I think the integrations. There's integrations, there's webhooks, there's Slack notifications. There's also, something that a large percentage of people on Hub make use of is our auto tests and auto builds, which, is a great area for us where I'd love to get more input from those of you listening to this of, are you using auto builds? What's useful for you? What's great? What do you wish you could do? What are you frustrated by? So that we decide, how do we invest in that differently? How do we think about, is that something, does it solve the problem you got? Are you good to go? And you're like, oh man, don't spend more time on auto builds. Give me this other thing over here. What are you waiting for? But it's a good example, right? You got auto builds, you got things like unlimited security scanning for your Docker repos in there. There's much more, and that's an area where I'm looking very hard at how can we make this better. When we think about solving problems for development teams, the place where the team all overlaps is in the Hub. It is not necessarily on somebody's local desktop. There's always, kind of hacks you can put in place to get your team into there, but that's not really how it was intended for use, and it's always less than ideal. And so when we think about where the team comes together, it's on Hub. So, we're looking at what are the kinds of problems that development teams have when they're trying to collaborate around sharing their containers, really around sharing their applications. And how do we make those kinds of problems easier? How do we solve those for you? And so, areas might look like, how do you collaborate more effectively as you're working on an application? How do you think about sharing those applications for review before you feel like they're done, but while they're still in progress? How do you get a better understanding of what your colleagues might be working on at any given moment? And where might you be able to contribute to those? So lots of different possibilities there, and I'm really excited about it. I think there's, great stuff we're doing on the desktop. Apple Silicon is just one example of some of the investment we're working there. But we're also going to be making a lot with Hub in terms of, especially, how do you make it better together? One part of that is working together more effectively with your team, but really the bigger picture for us is, how do we make it so that every time anybody does anything on Hub, it gets better for you? That's really kind of the magic that we're going for here is, if somebody else threw up basically a community generated image publicly, how do we expose that to you if it's good? So you can decide if you want to use it. How can we put some kind of quality checks in there so that you say, well, this is some random image from somebody over there, but oh, they did a security scan, so I guess it's good, right? Like, there's some level of trust that you can place in those things. There's some level of shareability and ease of use, so that we've got official images, we've got verified publishers producing certified images, but how can we also surface more content from our community so that we can help you as a developer be more effective? So there's a lot of different possibilities in there, but really all of them are about how do we accelerate the development team? How do we accelerate the developer every time people are doing things on Hub? Because that's one of the amazing things Docker has that is almost unique in the world, is more than 10 million developers using it. So that is a huge amount of momentum, a huge amount of opportunity to help you build upon the shoulders of your 9,999,000 colleagues over there who are also using Docker.
Yeah. And when I think about sharing, and, a lot of in the community, we do, GitHub code, right? Open source. But to be able, I love the idea of being able to, test out an open source app, even pulling a PR, right? A coworker of mine cuts a PR, being able to pull that from Hub with it's all containerized, everything's ready to go. It doesn't mess up anything on my system. I can help out. I can look at the code. I can test the bug, right? Review code. I mean, that's super, super powerful. 100%. Yeah.
Yeah. And what we keep running into is developers don't like pushing things to their team repo because it feels official. Right? It feels like, oh, I'm not sure I want to put it there because I'm still working on it. Like, this isn't done yet. I don't even really have it feature flagged or anything, but I still need to get feedback, or it would be helpful for me to get feedback because I'll save time later on if I can get somebody to look at it. How do I get somebody to look at it?
Yeah.
And that, I mean, there's a lot of different folks taking different stabs at that, but I think that's an indicator that we haven't found a great solution, is that there are so many different efforts trying to find answers to those kinds of problems.
Yeah, but the solution isn't putting a big "do not merge" label, right? I say that all the time. I mean, it's what we have right now a little bit, but
it's just like all the to-do comments in your code. Yeah. It's no different, right? You're like, oh yeah, I'll get to that later.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. Auto builds are fantastic, right? When I first came back to Docker in this role, I took a look at auto builds and gave a talk on it. Check it out; it's on YouTube. But I mean, the power of auto builds is amazing, right? I knew they were there, was using them, and it was very simple. But it's key, if you're using Hub and you don't have a CI/CD provider that fits your need, I mean, Hub auto builds is perfect, right? It's simple, it works really well, and actually under the covers, it's extremely powerful, right? It's extremely powerful. Yeah, I would love to see what we do with that, right, and how that moves forward, or if we integrate. That's a tough one. I'll leave that up to you, of course, but yeah, it's going to be interesting where the industry shuffles out, right, and what our customers think's the best. But
yeah, and that's exactly the take. Is it's another place where I'd say, let's get some feedback, right? Like, I'm looking for, like, the reason that I'm here today is to talk to everybody using Docker, and to not just talk at, but more importantly, have a conversation with and listen to. And so auto builds is just another one of those areas where, I want your feedback. I want to hear, how are you using it? What's working well? What's not working well? What do you wish it had that you're kind of forced to go outside and have an additional solution that makes your pipeline more complicated, where you just wish you could have it more in one place, or have it pre-integrated so you don't have to build all those fragile integrations that keep breaking, right? Because that's a problem we hear all the time with pipelines, is like, your pipeline is just a bunch of stuff kind of cobbled together with a bunch of scripts. They're in different languages, different people wrote them. You got to dig into it one day and you're like, man, where'd this Perl come from? Like, why is that still around? There it is.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's the complexity can get out of hand for sure. Here's I think this is the number one. Crazy Max, I like that containerized dev environment. We'll have to get you connected with Donnie and see what exactly you mean there. But yeah, and people are in the chat are screaming, hey, support Swarm, bring Swarm back. So that's a very interesting one. But yeah, so where do we want to go from here? So talk a little bit about, well, I'd love to just hear where you think, just what's out there that's really interesting to you. Where do you think we're going to look in a year from now, right? Like you alluded to earlier, right? This space that we're in, which has grown, and it's little bit different, but let's just say containerization, but in general. But where do you see that's going? What's interesting in that space? Who maybe some of the key players that you're looking at and watching?
Yeah, kind of in the container ecosystem, or just more broadly, like all the software development.
Yeah, just all software developments. Yeah, just general.
Yeah. No, I think there's a few trends that I've been following pretty closely. One of them that I'm really excited about, and you alluded to a little bit earlier on in our conversation, is around what I would call machine learning driven development, right? Not development of code that does machine learning, not that kind of Kubeflow or all those sorts of opportunities out there that make machine learning pipelines work more easily, but using machine learning and using models to replace code. That is something where, I feel like one of the most important things for developers to learn in the next decade is going to be picking up some of those machine learning skill sets and figuring out how can you take 20,000 lines of code and replace it with 50 lines of code in a model. And that, I've seen a few examples of this over the past few years, but not nearly enough. But it's something where you see it once and you're just struck by the power of it. You're struck by the time savings of thinking like, geez, if I could have not done all those kind of manual heuristics and switches and like just put all the work into manual data analysis and instead just kind of thrown a model at it. Now, clearly, to be able to do that, you have to be able to partner with somebody who's got that data science or machine learning background to say, oh, well, here's the models that make sense for this problem. Don't apply something that's well suited so that, the things you're creating, they make sense, they're interpretable, but even more importantly, as we've seen a lot of recent examples, they avoid bias, right? And they are, ethically compliant with the kinds of ways that we want our technology to work. And we see so many examples of kind of algorithm-driven extremism as conversations that have come up recently. Like, how do we help make sure that as developers, we are building things that move the world in the direction we want it to move? And I think learning about not just machine learning, but learning about why and what and the consequences of it is such an important part of that. And so that to me is one really big meaty topic that, if you haven't thought about how you're going to learn that, put it on your wish list for sure.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I think we think about self-driving cars and those type of things, right? Facial recognition, which are super important and interesting, but yeah, how do I use it myself day to day? So you're talking about, and I'm not very versed in this, but first thing that popped in my mind is just like, looking at a code in an enterprise and the data you store, right? And just doing data validation on inputs, right? It's such a manual, we kind of do it now. There's some tools where you can say, okay, these are, this is mandatory, it's not mandatory. And okay, request, just you do your thing, right? So a little bit along that lines, but you could probably even use machine learning to kind of look at your data and say, what's important, what's not important, what should our forms have, what shouldn't they have, even simple things like that, I would think, right?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Like you can use anomaly detection to find the weird stuff in there. Right. You could have it running different kinds of regression analysis or factor analysis to start telling you like what are the things that vary in an interesting way. Like, so being able to go to it and just ask a question and say, like, for example, do my customers want to spend more money with me if you're building a software product or you're in e-commerce or whatever you might be? Based on these different variables, right? Like, what are the things that people find valuable? What are the things that don't matter? And we should stop investing because they just nobody cares, right? Right. Or they care and they're like, oh yeah, I'd love to take some more of that for free. Like being at a parade and like, if somebody throws candy at you, you're going to grab it, but would you pay for it? And that might be a different answer.
I love that analogy. Yeah.
Like that's a good opportunity. Another one that's come up more often in the past few years is like things like a chatbot, right? Like, great place where you can replace just like thousands of lines of code that's trying to process that language based on specific words that might be mentioned and doing kind of stemming to remove like the ing endings, just all kinds of stuff.
Right.
Replace that with natural language processing models that are built around machine learning, using much more modern views of how the human language operates, and using that to understand the intent and being able to route, like if I used to run a support team and, the top 3 things just dominate your total traffic. Right. And if you have a way of understanding that it's one of those 3 things, and like routing it into this one bucket and saying like, oh, I understand that you want to reset your password. Here's the link to reset your password. Do you have another problem? And like suddenly you just solved your customer's problems in like 30 seconds instead of waiting on, making wait on hold, interact with a human. Like, I don't know how you are, but I hate talking on the phone with anybody ever. And so if I have to call somebody to talk to them, like I'm not like, oh, I'm so satisfied I could get to a human. Instead, I'm like, man, this sucks. And I'll procrastinate even like a 30-second conversation because I just don't want to talk to another person on the phone who I don't know. And so, it's those kinds of opportunities to bring in machine learning models and replacing just tons and tons of manual code and heuristics and different kind of branch handling that I see as something that really will change the way we build software.
Yeah. So I'm the same way. The only reason I want to talk to someone on the phone is because the AI is not working for me, right? It's like, God, I got it. Yeah. And then you go through the whole routine that you turn it on and off, right? It's like, yes, I wish we had like
turned on, I've rebooted it, it's plugged in, all those things.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, that's super interesting. I mean, I could even see an application just for what I do, right? With the community, we get probably 90% of the questions are, starting out questions that have been asked a lot from most people, right? It's just, it's just the way it is, right? But it's always like, it's a little nuanced, right? The way the question is, but the answer is usually the same for sure.
Right. Yeah. So like you could imagine having like an FAQ bot as a part of every new text or chat community you create. You say like, oh, here's FAQ bot. I feed it like the top 10 FAQs. It doesn't just do some kind of word matching or basic search. It does, natural language understanding to apply an intent and map that intent to the best question, or more importantly, understand if it doesn't know the answer. Because you don't want to just assume that it's one of those 10. You want to understand like what is your confidence level, and if it's too low, present them with multiple options, give them a path forward, because you don't want people to feel stuck. Yeah. Super cool. What about ARM? What about these M1 chips? What are your thoughts around that? It's pretty exciting. So I just got a 16-inch MacBook Pro, and I'm loving it. It's incredible. And then I see speed tests, right? I think some of the captains were slacking, right? For a MacBook Air is beating my machine, and I'm going, oh man, this is. I mean, yeah. What's your thoughts there? Yeah, it's a good question. I think everybody is interested to get their hands on some of these Apple Silicon chips to see what that performance looks like in some of the real world applications we have. It's always a challenge with micro benchmarks to say like, oh man, it's like 100 million flops. You're like, okay. Or, it does like some little database operation without doing a logical transaction in a way that developers interact with the database. And I think it's going to be super interesting to see more of those real world use cases get in there, so that we get a sense of like, what are these architectures good for? What are they not good for? I mean, this is going to be potentially the beginnings of a sea change in the developer and the end user computing environment. Like the last time a significant CPU changeover happened was when Apple moved off of PowerPC. Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And because Intel's been dominant on the desktop and AMD for so long, and we've got. Well, we had the move from x86 into kind of AMD 64, I will still call it, because they pioneered it.
Yeah.
And then, now on the server side, we've had a lot going on with ARM in the past few years, primarily driven by power efficiency rather than compute value. And so I'm very interested to see, like, how does the raw compute change when I'm a single person? Like, I don't care about power consumption on my laptop. I care about my productivity. And that's a very different question than, do I get better compute per watt?
Right. Yeah. It's going to be really interesting. And I love that answer, right? On, it's not just a matter of, oh, it's fast, right? Like, well, it's a more multivariate type of answer.
Yeah. Like maybe it's going to be amazing for vector processing. Right. And you'll say, man, video editing, just the best, amazing, incredible, super fast. What about when you want to do things that aren't vector processing? What about when you want to do floating point operations. Maybe it's not so good anymore. That's the kind of stuff that we'll start figuring out what it looks like in practice as we get more of those out there. And the same kind of thing, like we've had, there's been a ARM-based Surface for a little while now.
Yeah.
And it's gone through a lot of the same challenges that, Apple Silicon will be over the coming months, which is that small adoption right now, very early adopter audience. None of the applications work natively. Some of them work with some kind of emulation layer, but the performance isn't there yet. And so, as we see kind of both of the primary OS vendors start making that evolution, we'll see what it looks like over time as more developers start porting their applications. And as we see, like, what does it really mean for me to run my desktop on a different architecture like that?
Yeah. I was around. I think my first MacBook was on a PowerPC, and then they went to Intel. And that was Rosetta. I think it was Rosetta Stone was the first. I think I had it back then. But yeah, when I first switched over to Intel, all the apps didn't run natively. And then I think they also did a switch in the underlying, code base from Cocoa to Objective. Yeah, I forget exactly, but yeah, it'll be interesting. Yeah, it wasn't like, oh, we all just switch over and you just keep rolling. It was a little bit of a hump for sure.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, we have a question from the audience. Hopefully I'll read it all, but wouldn't it be a good idea to make a different tag than latest, mandatory for new images on Hub? A lot of images only have the evil latest tag. Yeah. Don't do it. From my standpoint, from non-product, right? Without a feature or change or anything. Yeah, don't do it. Try and latest is not the greatest. Let's say that, right? Specifically tag your images and use your tags, right? Pin them, as we say, or your images are going to get changed underneath you, right? With the latest is just the label and the image. We'll leave it at image underneath. It can change, yeah.
And I think that's the point, right? The image will change underneath you, and as long as you are aware of that, you can build for it. There's different contexts in which you may want that image to change rapidly. Versus not. Like, I'm a big fan, for example, of trunk-based development, where we're always working on the latest. We're using feature branches within our code. We're not kind of getting this version branch off to the side that's starting to diverge and getting all stale and weird and hard to, keep up to date. And if you put that in the context of containers, which are more like an artifact than code, like, what do you want? Well, sometimes you want to make sure you're always staying up to date, so that you know that your stuff works on the latest and greatest. As a developer, you want your software to continue working on everything new as it's released, because that's what all of your users are doing. They're just upgrading their stuff all the time. And if you haven't done any compatibility testing, you're going to end up in a weird spot. But then on the other side of it, when you want to start creating reproducible software, you absolutely have to have pegged versions somehow, right? You have to have them either in your tags, or you have to have them somewhere else. Like, maybe you've got your own artifact management somewhere else where you're maintaining which versions are available in there, so that it grabs the latest, but the latest means something different. It means the latest approved thing, because I only put approved things in the place that I've got my stuff. Yeah. And
it's an underlying kind of interesting question, right? And a kind of a product question, I guess, is, it's a feature and it's valuable, as you just went through, right? But then if people don't use it correctly, right, it can hurt you. So how do you think about that, right? Like, we don't want to deprecate, how do you give, you want to give your users power, right? But then you also want to guide them in the same, a safe path, let's say. Yeah, I
think the approach that some other software has taken, kind of building on top of Docker is, and more or less ripping off approaches from other packaging ecosystems, is using some kind of a version lock file, right?
Yeah.
Like, you go and look at the stuff that gets used, you generate a lock just like a gem file would, or NPM or others.
Yeah.
And that, feels like an approach where you get the latest, but then because you don't know necessarily what's out there before you pull it for the first time. You never know, like, package dependency resolution tends to be non-deterministic in nature. And so you get the stuff you get, and then you figure out, what did I get? Oh, let me lock those versions in place for now. And then explicitly upgrade later on. I think there's a lot of really interesting workflows around ideas like Dependabot, where you got something out there that's watching for updates and telling you and saying like, hey, there's an updated thing. I tested it. Your test still passed. We good to go? Like, can we merge this in or not? And that to me is a really compelling idea that sort of mixes the best of those worlds of putting you in a place that was the latest place when you last worked on it, and then helping you continue to stay current in a consistent, well-tested way.
Yeah. 100%. We have Crazy Max is asking a question, and I don't even think I'm aware of Docker image update notifier. I would have to go, Crazy Max, I would have to go use the Google machines, to be honest with you. Hopefully it's something I've already seen and just forgetting, but yeah.
Is this written by Crazy Max?
Yeah, I was going to ask earlier, is this a captain's tool, Crazy Max? Which is great.
Awesome. Docker image update notifier. I see the original blog post now, 2019.
Ah, I'll definitely have to go read about it. Well, cool. All right.
Yeah.
If out there in the community, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. We're coming up to time here. But yeah, Crazy Matt said, yeah, I'm the maintainer.
Nice.
Cool.
Yeah, it does. Oh, where's my thumb? Gotta get back in the video. There we are. No, I'm definitely gonna check that out because I think it solves a problem that is a really valuable one around how do you start with the latest and then upgrade consistently. Yeah.
Well, we're almost out of time, so that's a great way to segue. Can you tell people how to get a hold of you, how they connect with you online, if they wanted to speak to you or send you, what's the best way to connect with you? And yeah.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Happy to. For those of you who might be seeing this on video, I got my Twitter handle right down on the bottom there, D Berkholtz. And that is probably the easiest way to get access to me, I guess I could say. I would say I am better at interacting and responding on Twitter than I am by email. And so if you're trying to get a hold of me, like the #1 way to track me down is just go hit me up on Twitter. Definitely recommend it. I am very engaged in the tech community online and have been for many, many years. And I've always found it to be a super valuable place to interact. So feel free to, reach out, have a conversation on there. And then of course, I share my email pretty broadly. It's not hard to guess Docker emails. If you ever come across one, it's Donnie.Berkholtz. And I'm also on other places like LinkedIn, but Twitter is the best place to have a conversation. And then of course I will mention one more time, our open roadmap on GitHub, another great place to have a conversation that will go somewhere versus a conversation in the moment that gets lost in the streams.
Yeah. That's the tough part about Twitter, but it's a great way to, and get other people involved in the conversation you're having. And also to plug the community, go to /Docker-community, join our community Slack. We have a great community in there. You can ask your questions in there. Feel free to send me a direct Slack message. I will give a caveat and you can follow me on Twitter too and ask me questions there. I will give a caveat, a little bit like Donnie's. It's hard to give in-depth technical troubleshooting advice on Slack and on Twitter. So please, it's not that I don't want to help. It's just very difficult and get a lot of questions, but simpler, more succinct questions would be great. But
I am also in the Docker community Slack as well. So if you're looking for me there and you want to have something longer than 280 characters, great place for it.
Yeah, exactly. And also too, we're coming out. We're going to do a series, a meetup, community meetup series around. I didn't know I can do that with Docker. So we're going to have some guests. We're going to do some more technical deep dives. If you're just new to Docker, we're also doing a monthly Getting Started with Docker workshop. It's about an hour and 45 minutes, 2 hours, but we go hands-on, take you through the whirlwind tour of Docker. And that should give you a good foundation and you get started. But yeah, well, thanks again, Donnie. I really, really appreciate you coming on. We'll definitely have you back on in the new year. Check in with you and reach out to Donnie on Twitter if you want to talk to him. We'd love to hear from you. Really appreciate it, Donnie.
Thanks again for having me. Bye, everybody. I will see you soon.